With more, we're now joined by the Minister for the Environment and Climate Change, Steven Guilbeault. Minister, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Now, we heard it in the news conference today. More than 2,200 forest fires so far this season, more than 3 million hectares already burned down. Can you put that into context for us? Just how unusual is this fire season so far?
It's very unusual. If we look at the areas that have been burned in Canada so far, it's about 10 times the normal average for forest fires. So it is way above average, and it is likely, and what our modelers are telling us, or what our scientists are telling us, is that the conditions in June, in July, and August will continue to be very susceptible to have more forest fires. So it is likely going to be a very difficult year from that perspective.
So if it's going to be more difficult, Minister, are there enough resources to respond? Because right now I'm thinking of the current fires in Nova Scotia, Alberta, Quebec. We have firefighters coming in from the United States, all the way from South Africa coming to help. Will there be enough to respond if the expectation is that this is going to be a very bad fire season?
So two things I'd like to say on that, well, maybe three things. First, I'd like to thank profoundly all of our dedicated forest firefighters across the country who are helping us with this. It has already been a difficult start of the year. In Alberta, we almost have already more forest fires now than we did in 2016, which was one of the worst years ever. Nova Scotia, worst forest fires in the history of the province. Quebec, the Quebec government said, listen, there's too many, we can't handle them by ourselves. But in the past, Canadian firefighters have helped other countries, and now they're returning the favor. As you've said, the United States, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, France, as also President Macron has announced that they were sending in forest firefighters. And the second thing is, just last Friday, the Prime Minister asked the Chief of CAF if we anticipated to have all the resources necessary from a Canadian Armed Force point of view to fight the forest fires over the summertime, and our assessment is we do, but obviously this is a situation we will be following very closely.
Mm-hmm. Now, in the meantime, you noted the current fires burning in Alberta, Nova Scotia, and Quebec. What kind of aid is being extended for people in those provinces in the affected areas?
The aid ranges from obviously making sure that we have all of the resources to ensure that we can relocate people, we can evacuate people. Minister Guilbeault was there today at the press conference with the Prime Minister, saying that Service Canada will accelerate the demand for people who need, for example, EI because they've lost their work. We will facilitate if they don't have all of the paperwork because those papers might have burned. All the way to immigration to facilitate travel documents for those people who would have lost it. So it is really all hands on deck approach, whether it's Minister Wilkinson at Natural Resources, me at Environment. Many different government departments are working closely with our provincial counterparts across the country and Indigenous communities. We know that there's about 16 Indigenous communities across the country that are directly being affected by the forest fires, so we're working closely with them as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, I wonder, do you see this as a clear example of climate change and how it's being manifested in this country? And if so, how do we as a country adapt to what we're now seeing?
So the first thing is that we know from a scientific perspective that because of climate change, there will be more and more forest fires. Now, there is this thing called the science of attribution. Can we attribute specific extreme natural event to climate change? And I was speaking to our scientists just last Friday about this. And before, it would take a few months to be able to make that determination, where science is advancing so much that in a number of weeks, we should be able to make that determination, whether or not there is a clear link between what we're seeing in terms of forest fires and climate change. And thirdly, to your last point, how do we prepare, how do we help Canadians and Canada be better prepared to face the impacts of climate change? Well, it's by doing things like what we presented in last December, the Federal Action Plan on adapting to climate change, which was deemed by the Canadian Insurance Bureau as world leading. It's a federal response to how will we work with Canadians to help them prepare to climate change. We're currently working with provinces, territories, Indigenous nations, municipalities, private sector companies to create the first ever national adaptation plan. So how do federal government has a lot of things that we can do, but we can't do everything. We need to work with province, we need to work with territories and other partners, and that's what we will be unveiling in the near future to help Canada and Canadians be better prepared to face the impacts of climate change. But the last thing is, the more we reduce our climate pollution, the less climate change we will have in the decades to come. And obviously, the less we do that, the more we will have to adapt, the more we will have forest fires and hurricanes and floodings. And unfortunately, this is something the Conservative Party of Canada doesn't seem to be able to understand.
Minister Guilbeault, I really appreciate the time this evening. Thank you for this.
Thank you very much.